That's right. 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time, Monday through Friday. It is orange and blue today. It is Cecil Lammey. It is Andrew Mason. And Mace, we had some breaking news today, and it's something that I think people are of different opinions. The news broke as soon as Brandon Stokely and I went on the air today about Broncos wide receiver KJ Hamler, who has a slightly torn pec that he injured working out on his own. He's had surgery. The surgery will knock him out 4 to 6 months. This basically puts him up against the start of the regular season. And now we look at the situation, you go, okay, I guess it's a good thing they didn't trade Jerry Jeudy, although you could still make the argument that a wide receiver could be changing addresses, if you will. So, like, the KJ Hamler thing is interesting for him, but I think it doesn't necessarily take the Broncos out of working with a trade for, one of their wide receivers.
Yeah, and I honestly, I'm not sure it changes anything regarding Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy and whether either is traded or not. Because, with all respect to KJ Hamler, the history of injuries means that you weren't going into this season relying upon KJ Hamler being part of that core of wide receivers. You just can't. Not with the history of hamstring injuries, which he dealt with as a rookie and again last year, the dislocated hip, the torn ACL. I mean, and now you have the partially torn pec off of this, which means he's not going to be available for all of OTAs. And like you said, it could butt up right against the regular season, a 4 to 6 month timetable. Best case scenario is you're easing him back in at the start of training camp. That is the best case scenario here. If he's in the middle of that, that means he's ready by the end of the preseason. And with a new offense, new coaching staff, new everything, he's going to be hard pressed to be ready. So I think you kind of have to look at this and say that KJ Hamler is a bonus, but I don't think it affects what you're doing elsewhere, because if you trade Jerry Jeudy or if you trade Cortland Sutton, then I think the replacement is probably coming from the draft, from a fairly premium spot in the draft. Like if they trade Jerry Jeudy, I think you end up seeing at least a second round pick used on a wide receiver whom the Broncos would expect to play right away.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I alerted Brandon Stokely today. I was like, get dialed in on this draft, baby, because like I know it's a third round and everyone's people that are not you and me maybe have lost interest or like, whatever, some mid-round guys. Like, no, they could easily find their way back into the mix for first-round talent that fell to the second round, or first-round talent because they have a first-round pick, whatever. And the thing with KJ Hamler that I said, Mace, is like, it wasn't going to be used that much anyway. Yeah. So it's like, okay, so you lost a receiver that was going to catch 12 passes. As much as I like KJ Hamler and I appreciate how his speed can change things on the field, it's not really going to change your plan.
Yeah, at this point, if he's healthy, great, but it's kind of a luxury item at this point. It's not, when you're talking about what you need in order to go out there and succeed. You're not planning on KJ Hamler being that. Frankly, in terms of if you say, okay, one of these young guys could be our vertical threat, frankly, I think your better bet is hoping that Jalen Virgil makes the leap rather than hoping that KJ Hamler can be healthy. If you're trying to find some vertical speed from within, but that being said, I do expect they will look to the draft to find a vertical speed element as well. And that's where you could get into the round 2, round 3 conversation. I mean, now it's weird to say this, but given what they've done on the offensive line in free agency, it's not out of the picture that if there is a trade of Jeudy or Sutton, that you're looking at maybe even 2 pass catchers coming to the Broncos by the end of day 2 of the draft. That's how this could end up working. It could be a pretty seismic shift there. I think they spent free agency shoring up the run game in terms of that part of the offense, getting that up to speed with the moves made in terms of going to a more of a power blocking based scheme. It's possible we're looking at the draft being more about resuscitating the passing game in terms of targets.
Yeah, and maybe some more luxury picks is what people would say there, and say like, okay, well, they'll need wide receivers if they start moving wide receivers. I still think tight end is an option.
Yeah, I do
It's
too.
an option for this team because the tight end class is great. So you don't have to wait until the 7th round to find Jack Coletto or whatever. You can get in the 3rd round and get some really good tight ends.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that idea of you worked with the ground game in free agency. Now you work with some receiving skills in the draft and find some young players that you can build around for the future.
Exactly. And also, if you're talking about maximizing the value of what this draft is this year and where you stand, tight end could make sense. Look, I don't mean to denigrate the wide receiver position in the draft, but when was the last time there was a bad wide receiver crop in the draft? 2013, when pretty much everything was down in the
Right.
draft. Yeah. So you go back the last 10 draft classes, this one in 23 through 14, there isn't a really bad wide receiver crop in the bunch when we look back to how we were perceiving these receivers going into the draft. So the point being is that you can generally count on a good level of wide receiver talent in the draft. College football has no problem producing wide receiver talent, but tight end is much more hit or miss from year to year. So if you're thinking over the horizon and you've got comparable wide receivers and tight ends when you're sitting there, let's say you don't make a trade and you're picking at 60, 67, 68, and it's a wide receiver or a tight end, frankly, I'm more likely to go tight end based on the fact that I feel like I can get that receiver position taken care of in a future year, long term. But the tight end the classes tend to have more variance from year to year than the wide receiver classes do, and smart teams know this.
Yeah, and you're just adding talent to the room, no matter if it's a wide receiver room or tight end room. If you're the Denver Broncos, you just need more talent. I want offensive line and defensive line and pass rushers. But if it's a wide receiver, if it's a tight end, I can easily understand why the Broncos would do that. On the KJ Hamler thing, not to necessarily tie a bow on it, Mace, because I don't like speaking in these terms, but you have to begin to wonder how much more of this young man's career is left out there, just because of all these injuries. And this is a pec, it's not a lower body injury, at least, which he suffered, and had the hip problem, which was added to the problem of his knee problem that he's already had and the hamstring problems. But you just have to wonder, one, is he going to make the team, or how does that look? Probably pup to begin the regular season, and then we'll see. And then two, after that, it's like, how much more? He was in a contract year this year.
Right.
How much more does he even play in the NFL?
And look, his trade value is basically non-existent. No,
Right.
he didn't have much trade value even before this pec injury because of the injury history that he has, and now it's just out of the question. Either he's with the team, or you're probably cutting him, because there isn't value to a player who can't stay healthy, unfortunately, even with that time speed that he possesses, and it certainly shows on the field in terms of the brief glimpses that we've had. It's KJ Hamler is really at the brink of becoming just one of those, man, if only players, right? Like, if only he could have stayed healthy, because we've seen the flashes. We saw a decent amount of those flashes in 2020. We saw some last year when he played 6 games in a row and he was leading the Broncos in average per catch, and he was a vertical stretch threat. But the thing that we also know is how much pain that young man was in getting ready to play. I mean, he mentioned once in the locker room early in the season, the stretching routine that he had to go through on a daily basis just to be ready to practice. I mean, this is not somebody who could just go through the calisthenics before practice, take a few reps on the jugs machine, and get ready to go. This is somebody who had to basically go through an hour plus of stretching and work every day just to be ready to practice, because of the injuries that he had the previous year. And remember, after the first game they played on turf, he didn't play the next week because he hadn't bounced all the way back from that first game in Seattle on turf to be ready to play on grass the next week in Denver. And then he ended up playing the 6 games that followed before he had that hamstring injury in practice. But I mean, but he's the work he has to do to get ready just to practice. This is why he won the Ed Block Courage Award from the team for what he's endured just to go through the day to day of being a football player. But it also tells you, man, you can't. Unfortunately, you can't rely on KJ Hamler being a part of that receiver room. And it's painful to say because he has a talent. He's a really good dude. I mean, he's talked about his own mental health struggles as well. On a human level, Cease, this injury, I worry about KJ Hamler, given what he's shared with us about the mental health issues that he's had. I hope this doesn't take him to a really dark place mentally, and if it does, I hope that he continues to do what he has done and get help and be kind of forthright about tackling that. I worry on a human level about KJ after this injury.
Yeah, too many people forget that these players are people.
Yeah.
I know it's entertainment, I know it's sports, I know we love it, but like the human struggle, that's always the most fascinating to me, and it's one of the reasons why you called it if only, right? Your if
Yeah.
only players. I remember, and Gil Brandt said hell of a question at the combine years ago when I was talking to Marcus Lattimore, who was one of those if only players. Now he
Right.
shredded his knee in his sophomore year at NC State after a freshman season where he looked like he was, Eric Dickerson or whatever.
Mm.
And then he shredded his like every ligament, major knee damage, nerve damage, and then talking to the combine, I made him choke up at the podium. And that's where Gil Brandt off to the side. I talked to Marcus and I talked to Gil, and they were just like, hell of a question, man, because it is that struggle, it is that journey, and there are so many players that are the if only they'd stay healthy guys. And unfortunately, it looks like KJ might be one of those, like Marcus Lattimore was from college to the pros.
Yeah, and look, it all started before the combine for KJ. Remember, he was training to run at the combine in 2020, right before the world changed, and he injured his hamstring. He couldn't run, and really, that was a reason why he fell into the second round. Like you could look at him and Jalen Reagor, a guy who has not lived up to his expectations. Let's be fair, but Jalen Reagor, KJ Hamler, resumes were very similar. Reagor ran at the combine and turned heads, and KJ didn't have that chance. And then the thing that kind of went beyond that is COVID happened, pro days didn't happen, and KJ really didn't have didn't have the chance to kind of get his resume back from that opportunity that he lost at the combine. And that's, you look back, it's like it really did kind of start there, just unending woes. I mean, you look back like that rookie season, hamstring injury before the combine, hamstring injury in camp, hamstring injury during the season. It was kind of remarkable that he played in 13 games that year as a rookie. And then by December, we know in that Carolina game when you had a little bit of a lapse in coverage on the back end from the Panthers, and KJ made them pay for 2 touchdowns in that game. I mean, you could, and that's another thing with KJ. We did see the flashes. Like it's not like it's the if only, it's not like we didn't get a chance to see it. We can actually pop on some tape and see when KJ had those moments where he was a blur and a potentially devastating weapon for an offense. And sadly, and sadly, it looks like we're not going to see that come to fruition for him to become the kind of player that I think we all hoped he could be if he could stay healthy. And that's a shame. And by the way, I'm going to get on my soapbox real quick, Cease, for a sec.
Of course, yeah.
I will never call him a bust. If it's injury, you're not a bust, period. Like going into the Wayback Machine, Kijana Carter, number 1 overall pick, he's not a bust. He got injured. He tore his ACL, shredded his knee in his first preseason, and eventually he battled back and had a pretty solid career. But you'll never hear me call Kijana Carter a bust. He got injured. There's a difference. KJ Hamler, if it doesn't work out for him with the Broncos, please, if you're watching this, do not call him a bust. He got injured. That happens.
And
Paxton Lynch is a bust.
Yes.
KJ Hamler, not a bust.
not a bust. And it's rewind where people say like, well, that was a bad pick. Like, no, I mean, it was interesting that they go back to back wide receivers, and it doesn't really happen that often in the draft. We've talked about that. But given the first round grade, given the world class speed, you can see the attraction. You can see what the Broncos were trying to do. Their wide receiver core could have been Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler. And now in 2023, if Jeudy gets traded away and Hamler can't play, it might not be either one of them. So it's just you set things up in the NFL draft, you take your chances, but it's not like that was a bad pick. It was interesting because they already had taken Jeudy, but it wasn't a bad pick given the fact that he did have first round talent.
Yeah, the risk reward ratio is something that often gets talked about in the draft. And I'd say from what we saw in the glimpses where KJ was healthy and was able to show that top line speed, that's the reward. The risk was the injuries. But I think the risk reward ratio on KJ Hamler would have been out of whack in the first round, but it was probably right in the second round. And look, when you roll the dice, sometimes it comes up snake eyes. It happens, and you just feel for the kid. I mean, I feel like it's kind of a sad show when we're doing this, and I feel like we're almost writing a little bit of a career epitaph on KJ Hamler. And look, I hope he can get back, but the odds are decidedly against him. And then factoring into that is that Sean Payton and his coaches aren't really going to have a chance to see what KJ Hamler can do in practice until, best case scenario, you've got him up to speed midway through training camp. And again, that's the best case scenario. His injury history would tell you that you don't want to rush him back either. And that's why I think you said something interesting with the PUP list. That will require some patience on the Broncos' part. And I feel like last year they were impatient with KJ Hamler and probably rushed him back a little bit too soon. To me, he was a classic PUP candidate coming off of the hip and ACL injuries. And I feel like once Tim Patrick went down, there was a little bit of a panic.
Right.
I hope and trust that this Broncos regime doesn't fall victim to that and gives KJ the time that he needs and is more patient with him coming back, because really his best chance may well be being as cleared from this injury as possible. And that would mean sitting out camp, going on the PUP, trying to get him ready for late October.
Right. And I know he was pushing to come back last year, but correct me if I'm wrong, he began training camp on the PUP.
Yeah, I believe so.
He could have began the regular season on the PUP. That's the NFL rule. If you begin training camp, you can begin the regular season. If you don't begin training camp on PUP, you cannot begin the regular season on PUP. So the Broncos had the right idea.
Yeah.
And their plan, I remember talking to KJ in like June or something at one of the mini camps, standing off to the side, and he was like, I think they're going to put me on PUP. I was like, that's a good plan. But then, like you said, the Patrick injury and this team seemed to, have some desperation. Obviously, he was pushing to get back. And sometimes, man alive, you've got to temper those players because they want to get out there, but you also want to be very careful.
Yeah, you look back and it was one of the failures of Nathaniel Hackett. I think he was a little bit impatient in a lot of ways and panicked. And I think getting Hamler back, I think that was a panic move in terms of that. You could even say, Greg Dulcich had all the hamstring injuries, remember, in OTAs. They probably made a panic move with him, rushing him back out there despite the hamstring issues for training camp. And then, of course, they had to put him on injured reserve, right? And then, of course, we know about the Broncos trying to kind of jam 20 pounds of offense into a 5-pound bag and, schematically, and get everyone up to speed way too quickly instead of kind of learning it bit by bit by bit. Things might have turned out differently for Nathaniel Hackett if you hadn't had this seeming urge to kind of rush things along. And that's where I think Sean Payton is going to be different, because Sean Payton, I think he pretty clearly has a mandate. He is He is the guy of new ownership. He's got a 5-year contract. He's basically the highest paid coach in the NFL, and I think he will have much more patience And I think that will, knock on wood, hopefully show with how they handle KJ Hamler, because, Sean's not stupid. He knows that Hamler is an intriguing weapon, but he also knows the injury history at this point. So
Yeah.
I'm fascinated to see how they handle him, but I think I actually have some faith they're going to do the right thing by him and be very judicious as they bring him back.
It's just good business, and it's good business to have that patience with your head coach, because it is win now. It is not for long. But when you have Sean Payton, I mean, he's getting at least 2 years.
I'd say probably
at least
three.
three. Right.
I think no matter what, he's the coach
Yes.
for 3 years, because
Yes.
in part because if you look at the potential quarterback paths based on whether you can get Russell Wilson back or not, if you don't get him back, then it's probably a young guy in 2024, and that will buy Sean Payton up till 2025. So I think, knock on wood, good health, creek don't rise, all that. Sean Payton's your coach for the next 3 seasons.
Yeah, and that gives a sort of steadiness to this franchise that they haven't really had, because they've been trying to get back and they've been trying to win now, and they've never really rebuilt.
Yeah.
They've never done a scrap it all, strip everything down to the studs sort of rebuild. It's always been, as Vance Joseph used to say, it's reboot. Yeah, the reboot. You keep rebooting. You needed a rebuild.
I hate that. Think about
and
that. You need a
now
rebuild.
with Sean Payton, you have that opportunity, because he's not going anywhere, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's gonna hopefully that'll help KJ Hamler, because I'd like to see it work for him. And look, if you can get him right, then maybe you're able to bring him back on a prove it type of contract after the 23 season, and see where he can go, because playing the long game is probably KJ Hamler's best chance here.
Yep, that's the best chance for the Denver Broncos. Other Broncos news, we talked about the Russell Wilson thing. I did talk to Mike Kliss today, and he said in the second wave and third waves of free agency now, expect the Broncos to approach the safety market. And whether that means bringing Kareem Jackson back or waiting for his price to come down. When Kareem Jackson was on Good Morning Football a week or two ago, and he was asked, "Do you want to go to contender?" Before the question was even answered, before it was even asked, it was like a word bubble, on a comic book, and it was like up in the air. He was like, "Yes." "Do you want to be work for a contender?" "Yes." "Championship kit?" "Yes." So obviously Kareem, who's still playing good football, we see the PJ Locke move. We know Caden Stearns is there, and those young players have some talent. But there's an opportunity, maybe if Kareem doesn't find exactly what he's looking for in free agency, to come back to the Denver Broncos, or for the Broncos to find another veteran safety.
Well, it's funny because one of the pieces I'm working up for denversports.com the next couple of days is on, like, okay, you get into the second wave, where are you looking? And yeah, safety is right there with that. I think safety, I don't think you'll see edge rusher, although I think the Broncos have their eye on that as well. But that's a position that I think maybe you're taking a look at in the draft to see kind of who falls and what and who and what ends up being there. But they need some more depth on the edge. They need to figure out safety. It's not that they don't like Caden Stearns, but the best ability is availability. And Caden Stearns has an injury history going back to when he was at Texas. He's missed a lot of games over the last 4 seasons, 2 with the Broncos, 2 with the Longhorns. So that factors into the Broncos' plans. I know, some fans out there, it's always optimism. Oh, let's trust in Caden. Let's see if he can get it right. Hey, you can trust in him, but you better have your butt covered in case injuries strike again, because unfortunately that's been part and parcel of the career to date for Caden Stearns. So I think you look there. For those who will bring up Latavius Murray, I know you and I have discussed Latavius is going to be there in a couple of months if you need him. No reason to kind of look in that direction. Really, I think, but we may look and say the most prominent signing of the second wave of free agency ends up being Riley Dixon, who's already in the fold.
Yeah. So there you go. Are you surprised that they didn't address safety in that first wave when they were on their spending spree?
Well, I mean, they took a long look at CJ Gardner-Johnson, but ultimately CJ decided to go to not Sean Payton, but a Sean Payton disciple in Dan Campbell, which, I mean, I think it doesn't surprise me when the Broncos and Lions are in on some of the same players, because philosophically, in terms of how Dan Campbell sees team building. He sees it in what he learned from being around Sean Payton. I think that's a key thing. So it doesn't surprise me when you see a player who's got interest from those two teams, because I think they're looking for similar traits. And of course, Campbell being in New Orleans, just like Sean Payton was in New Orleans, knew very well what kind of player in person CJ Gardner-Johnson was. I think what it also maybe shows is for someone like CJ GJ, you know, maybe he sees a quicker path to being part of a special season in Detroit than Denver, because the obstacles toward being a Super Bowl team are pretty numerous here. Whereas, the Lions, they were on the upswing last year. Just because they weren't a playoff team doesn't mean they weren't among the 10 best teams at the end of the season. I think they were, Cecil, a top 10 team by the end of the season, and they were showing it in terms of their play on the field. It just took them too long to launch. But you look around the NFC, I don't see a reason why Detroit can contend. So to me, it made sense that he went there, even though there was Broncos interest in him.
And just look at their own division, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, Minnesota will do their thing like Minnesota does, but now the Packers without Aaron Rodgers, eventually, is that ever going to, like, just get it, please go to the Jets. Please, I'm sick of waiting and talking about it. Like, and then you've got the Lions there, and they are on the rise. They're a team that can contend, and, wouldn't surprise me if they were the division winner this year. And obviously, Chicago fans will get mad at me. It's like, okay, well, Justin Fields, it's on you. Can you take that Jalen Hurts jump this year? Or are you going to be the running quarterback who never developed? That's the question.
Yeah, by the way, and I don't mean to speak ill of Ted Thompson, the late Ted Thompson, who I know you are an admirer of.
Yeah.
Okay. But the Packers seem to major in kind of messing around and not doing things until the last minute. I mean, they didn't pull the trigger on parting ways with Brett Favre until when? August of 08? Because he just kind of showed up with the Jets, right? I mean, they just this is just what they do for whatever reason. And Brian Gutekunst, he is a Ted Thompson disciple. I mean,
yes.
Ted is no longer with us, but Ted's philosophy and how they do things in Green Bay, for better or for worse, is very much alive.
Yes.
In terms of what they're doing. So that's why, are they dragging their feet? Yes. For whatever reason, this is just what the Green Bay Packers do, is drag their feet.
That's just their way. And correct me if I'm wrong, didn't they not want Favre to go to Minnesota? So he went to the Jets, and then he wound up with Minnesota anyway.
They did. Yeah, they absolutely did not want Favre in the NFC North. Didn't want to see him, and you can't blame him. So, but I don't think this is a path for Aaron Rodgers going elsewhere in the NFC North in time, because first of all, strangely enough, Detroit seems very happy with Jared Goff. That's what happens when you hire a GM who was originally part of drafting you.
Mm-hmm.
Never a loss of faith in Jared Goff, and actually looked pretty dadgum good last year, right? I mean, one thing we've seen with Goff is that with good coaching, he's a good quarterback. And he's got that in Detroit, and he had that in Los Angeles. And then Chicago's pretty well set with Justin Fields, evidenced by their trade. And Minnesota, everyone likes to dog on Kirk Cousins, but he wasn't the reason why they fell short. They fell short because they couldn't stop anybody, which is why Ed Donatel lost his job.
Right. And I'll say this, it's not, oh boy, what, Hawaii blue and silver shirt today?
Honolulu blue.
Honolulu blue and silver and Honolulu blue today.
Yeah.
But I've had Lions people tell me, because, the people like to connect, would you guys go get like an Anthony Richardson or something?
Yeah.
And this is how highly thought of Jared Goff is. They don't need to mess with him in the building. By having that sort of guy like right there behind him, chomping at the bit. So that tells you what they think of Jared Goff. Fans may think something different. Fantasy players may think something different, but that's what the team thinks of Jared Goff.
He's still a quarterback who, when he had something, when he was surrounded by talent, got the Rams to a Super Bowl. And that, wouldn't it be something if he could pull that off in Detroit? I wouldn't be surprised if he did. That's the thing. I mean, I look at Detroit, I look at the roster, and look at how they were playing at the end of last year. I'm like, they have as good a chance as Philadelphia of getting back, or San Francisco, or anybody else in the NFC. I mean, I'd actually look at Detroit right now as maybe one of the top 4 teams in terms of having a chance to win that conference. Amazing. It's amazing what they've done. And also, again, patience, right? I mean, they didn't freak out when they were nearly historically bad to start Dan Campbell's era, right? And they didn't freak out when they struggled at the start of last year. They were patient. The line. I mean, it's strange to say this, but the Lions appear to be a well-run organization right now.
That's good. That's a good sign of what you need. Coming to denversports.com soon, your second and third waves of free agency. I'm writing up Cameron Young, run stuffing defensive tackle, who the Broncos met with virtually.
Yes.
And I believe they only have 3 of those. So they've used
Isn't
one
that
on
weird?
A quarterback. It is weird.
You get fewer virtual visits than actual visits.
Right. So you've got your visits in person, 30 visits, and then your 3 Zoom calls. So the Zoom call, and writing it up for denversports.com, Cameron Young, defensive tackle, run stuffer from Mississippi State. So they've used 2 of theirs. And I wrote about their other Zoom call that we know about in the Penn State quarterback, Clifford, Sean Clifford. He's going to be a Taysom Hill. He's not going to play quarterback.
I know.
But he did make Will Levis leave. He made Will Levis leave Happy Valley.
I know. I mean, you got to really squint to see it in this guy, man. I mean,
unless
I
it's
agree.
Taysom Hill.
You know what? I would rather have Max Duggan if he falls, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd rather
almost
have
all
him.
the quarterbacks we saw on the All-Star road trip would be better than Clifford.
Aiden O'Connell.
Didn't see Clifford. Aiden O'Connell would be great. Be fantastic.
Darian Thompson Robinson. Give me some DTR. Again, no disrespect to Sean Clifford, but he doesn't. I mean, he doesn't really have the arm. I mean, I guess it's a better arm than Tim Tebow, but I mean, it's a pretty low bar. Yeah, I was when I saw that, I was really curious. I think a lot of us were like, really? Okay.
Okay. Why?
Yeah.
All right, there we go. That's coming up. That's a wrap for Orange and Blue today. Thank you to Rachel behind the scenes. He is Andrew Mason. You follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. I am at Cecil Lammey, saying be safe, be kind, know that you are appreciated. Stay tuned. And as always, I ask that you please stay frosty.